brute force is out. And I wanted to make a project breakdown so you guys can see how I made it. So let's get right into it. Okay, I'll start with the intro. Super basic stuff here. Like, honestly, the intro is not super interesting at all. It's just like A bars and then build up. So what I started using here was one of these loops. I don't remember which one. I think this one maybe. And of course, I added some process just to make it sound like this. So let me just turn it off so we can see what's going on. So without any process, it sounds like this. And of course, I pitched down the sample a little bit just to make it fit in key. And then I have serum effects. I'm using all pass and just a little bit of compression. Amp to store things. EQ, OTT, okay? So it's basically just trying to distort the sound a little bit and then kind of like make it fit in the mix with a little bit of OTT. Maybe I should have done this actually, like post OTT, but I didn't. So forget about that. This is the main synth from the intro, and then I have this. So this is the low end that I'm using in this part. And it's from an atmosphere. I think I was just kind of like experimenting with different stuff in the low end because I usually just use respaces, okay? But in this case, I just wanted to go with something a little bit different. So I grabbed this audio. And of course, I just looped this little section. And distorted it a little bit, compression, you know, basic stuff. Like, honestly, nothing too crazy. Amp is just doing like most of the work. And what else? That's kind of like the main two elements. So this one and this. And what I'm doing here, just to make it a little bit more interesting, is kind of like turning on and off this autofilter. So that way it's kind of like playing a call and response phrase instead of just being like that ARP all the time. Effects, let's check this out. Some basic stuff as well, an impact. Some atmosphere elements here and there, nothing too crazy. Some radio, feedback noise. And this drone. Honestly, I always have like hard times trying to make these atmospheric, kind of like dark scenarios. So I usually just go for samples and try to make them fit and see if any combination of samples kind of like work. And then in the drums, I have this thing. And then drums for the build-up. Kick, clap, super basic stuff. And then some loops here. Since I was going with this Avant sample, like this techno sample, I was like, okay, maybe I should try to use some cymbals or percussions that kind of like fit. So I went with some Avant samples as well. No process at all. And this one. Honestly, these Vengeance samples are so insane. So this is what I have. And of course, with the effects going up here and some more stuff. We also have this. I think this is kind of like interesting. I mean, you've probably seen me do these kind of like sustain layers with just sampler. So I'm just gonna turn the processing off. So basically, you just loop a section, okay? In this case, it's pitching up because this is supposed to be a riser. But then I have distortion, a little bit of reverb, and more distortion, honestly. It's basically what I'm trying to do with distortion is this. The bass is just like all the way up, which gives me like a lot of like grit in the sound. And turns it into something a little bit more, it adds a little bit of body and it's not so airy, I guess. OTT to compress, EQ to cut the low end. Reverb, I guess, for this part, I don't know. I thought it sounded good with that. Distortion at the end. This is kind of like leveling, like a output saturator. It's not really distorting that much. And then EQ. clean the low end again. Always make sure to do this. It's honestly one of the most important things that you can do in your mix sounds. If you're someone that doesn't want to like mix at the same time when writing a tune or something, at least do this. Like make sure you clean the low end in each layer, because all this stuff at the end is gonna play a huge it'll have like a huge impact in how far you can push your meter. So we have this, some other shout out Ivory. I'm always using like his effects, and that's pretty much it for this part, like super basic stuff. Then of course the bass is just playing like a sustained note here. And I do have some of these. And I think this is a resample from the main bass. So if I just go and look for this sample, you see it's pretty much the same bass that I have in the drop. So in order to kind of like go from this intro into this drop, I need some kind of transition in between. And I always think about, okay, idea 1, idea 2, and then transition in between idea 1 and idea 2, of course. And in order to just make that transition work, I need some elements from here and some elements from here. That's always my starting point, or my thought process behind it. So I started like resampling some of these sounds, and I got this bass that you'll see here in the drop later. And I just resampled this one shot, and I added a little bit of reverb, distortion, OTT, and of course, low cut. So I have this. I added pretty much the same one, I think, but I think I chose a different section in the loop. Okay, so have this one on top of this. Oh wait, this is off. Okay, I didn't use this one. I'm sorry. So. Right until here, until this point. And vocals, I know you guys like or always ask about vocals and how I do them, and I have a lot of tutorials on Instagram if you wanna like check this out. But this is pretty much like a resample. Of course, you need to, when it comes to vocals, I always go for like hip hop tunes and try to find like any phrase I like, and then try to place it properly in the arrangement, in the timeline, because I used to think that you need to just find the perfect sample that's gonna perfectly match or fit the tune, and that's it. But sometimes you need to just put a little bit more work into these vocals. Move through the heat like a so it sounds like this. And of course, if I just used that vocal as it is here, it's not gonna work, right? So I needed to just add some markers, kind of like move the vocal a little bit, and then mess with the pitch. The pitch is kind of like optional. I like to do it because sometimes like low pitch vocals sound better, sometimes high pitch vocals sound better. But yeah, that's pretty much it with the sound, with this sample, with this pre-drop. And OTT, just to compress, I like this digital kind of sound in my vocals. Compress room to give it a little bit more space. EQ because I don't need any low end, and saturator at the end. And maybe I should have done this again. Like sometimes I forget, but it's not the end of the world if this, I mean, it's a pre-drop, nothing else is happening here. But if this was here in the during the drop with the basses playing, maybe it could be a little bit weird sometimes. So and you can see how much difference you get in the sound by just using something like this, super basic stuff. Okay, and then I had the same, pretty much like one of the samples from the same acapella that I got, and I chopped this part in order to just have like a smoother transition in the fake out, right? I don't want it to go from this pre-drop vocal into nothing and then just like come back with vocals, so I kept this vocal playing. Yeah, pre-drop super simple too. Some effects going up, nothing crazy. And this one is pretty much like a different effect made out of the same bass loop, I think. Yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of like grabbing one sound and trying to make the most out of it. Because I don't like in the middle of the process to just go and look for new tools. You know, I want to get everything done in the project, like all the stuff that I need, all the tools, and then try to make the most out of them, right? It's kind of repetitive what I said, but sometimes I don't know, let's say we have a vocal and we just use this vocal here and that's it. But you can make, I don't know, some sustains for the drop. You can make some reverb tails. You can make a different pattern for the breakdown, you know? You can make a lot of stuff. And that's what I usually try to do with everything, not just vocals. In this case, it was the bass, because I think this project started as a sound design thing. So this was my starting point. And from this, I got pretty much like all the instruments that I was using. So there's another effect. And classic gatekeeper vocal. Had to process it a little bit because this tune is kind of loud, so I had to just make it a little bit louder too. And some other chops, like some other pieces of the vocal. I always do that, and I for example, if I'm using this one again, let's say here, I would try to just change it a little bit, like change the pitch or something, in order to just get like a new variation and make it sound different, right? Then let's get into the drop. So let's start with the drums. Drums are super basic, so we'll start here. We'll go up, we'll go to the effects, and then the sound design, which is the most interesting part, I guess. We have the drums, okay? And I use my drums in MIDI. And the reason why is because it's so easy to kind of like change the pitch of my drums and then see if they fit better in the mix. So first I have this kick. It's like a super distorted kick that I made with Operator. And I kind of like these decap drums, hip hop drums, kind of like trappy stuff. So what I did was using this in sampler, and I also added a lot of drives, as you can see. So this by default comes with the clean circuit. If you change it to one of these, in this case I use MS2, you can start distorting basically with the filters. And sometimes it sounds very good. I kind of like how this kick sounds like. And honestly, nowadays I don't do much to my drums besides something like this maybe, or just like layering stuff. But it's like you don't really need to process any of your drums unless you're using the worst samples ever, right? Clap. What are my claps? Same thing. I added distortion with the filter thing and like a snare layer. Same thing, like same idea, low cut, and then we have super loud and stereo clap. So we have kick, kick, clap, and then cymbals. Some of the cymbals that I made, and literally like quarter note cymbals, nothing too crazy. But same thing, the cymbal sounds good and kind of like fills up all the space. But if you need to just use more than one layer, just like go ahead. Sometimes I use 2, 3. And it's okay, let me check. No, I'm not really using any other cymbal during the track, but that's pretty much it. Effects. I do have a lot of background stuff. And these are funny. I mean, it's kind of like funny to make these background effects because on their own they sound kind of like dumb. It's like you need to kind of like hear all these layers in context in order to make sure they work, you know? So it's not that I'm just doing this and saying, okay, yeah, that's fire, and I just add it. No, I'm usually just playing the drop with these in the process and probably like this, I don't know. And changing stuff, you know, that way I can kind of like make it fit in the tune, right? So sometimes I would just solo this with the basses and see if they make sense, you know, stuff like that. But same idea, I would just grab any loop, loop it in a section, process it, EQ it out. You don't need any low end for your background layers. Same idea here, same idea here. And they're all sitting in different kind of like frequency ranges, so they're all working together, okay? And this makes a huge difference in the drop. Like the energy that those effects are carrying in the background is just insane. And sometimes that's all you need in order to just go from something that sounds super empty into something that's that sounds energetic, and then that allows you to kind of like move forward. Because we sometimes, I don't know, we're sound designing, right? We're just making basses and stuff like that, but we feel like it's not enough, and we want to just add more and more and more, and we keep processing stuff. And sometimes the only thing that you need is just some layers in the background. And in this case, I'm using these, and I'm also using these. Quite a note, kind of like a pattern thing. More sustains, you know, same idea. In this case, reverb, OTT, and then serum effects empty, because that, you know, that makes it sound good. Soothe, because I think it was a little bit too harsh. And EQ, this is key, like game-changing EQ right here. So all the background elements sound like this. And that's actually pretty huge when it comes to like creating energy and tension and stuff like that. And honestly, I'm not even worried about the key of some of these layers, because same thing, it's like a heavy drop. It's like a heavy atmosphere. So I don't really care if they're out of key or anything, because that also creates a lot of tension. But same thing, you want to make these in context and just see if they work. Okay, let's go to the bases. Like, there's nothing else here. Bases, I started it with a serum preset, and I think I started with one of these. Let me check. This actually sounds pretty good. I was pretty happy with this preset on serum, but this is just like basic shapes FM from B, you know, classic. Like, there's not even that many LFOs just doing weird stuff. So we have let me just turn off the post process so you can hear the preset, and maybe I can post this preset if you guys want it. Just let me know. Sub, FM from B, and some things going on here. Let me just explain it a little bit better. So FM from B, cell wave, if you change it, it would sound pretty different. So I think this is kind of like the most important part. And then square wave, because I feel like it worked. I don't usually FM from a square wave, but in this case, I think it sounded awesome, honestly. High notch for the filter, because I don't want any low end, but the sub is not going into this filter. And the reason why is because I want my sub kind of like going into the distortion. And I always do that. Like, I don't usually just cut my sub with like high pass filter. Like I don't do that anymore. And the reason why is because I usually just use the sub from my sounds now. And if I do something like this, where I send the sub into the filter, you'll get a lot of muddiness out of here. And you'll probably have to, after the post process as well, you'll have to just cut the low end and just add a new sub, because it probably sounds pretty bad. So I was using FM, basic LFO shape. This one is for the sub, so I'm using a different shape for each level, and that allows me to have a little bit more control over each of these. Okay, LFO 3 is just reverb. That's not something that I do a lot, but it gave it a little bit of space, so I think that's good. And then some effects. Let's check it out. So I usually start with like something like this. This would be my starting setup with like any preset or every serum preset. I'll try diode 1. Sometimes I try diode 2 or different. I don't like to just stick with tube, because I feel like it's the most basic one. But then I was using all pass. All pass is my go-to when it comes to serum distortion. In this case, I'm not using the drive here, because the diode 1 is pretty heavy on the distortion, right? Maybe if I want to use this drive, I would just turn this off, right? But diode 1 sounded pretty cool, actually. And I wanted to kind of like get rid of some high-end information, so I added this filter, which is just being modulated by this LFO2. So that's pretty tight, right? And then reverb, because why not? A little bit of space. That's pretty much it for the preset. And of course, you need to mess with the octaves. And this was the starting point, but it gets a little bit more interesting later. And then I added disperser, OTT, saturator. Pretty cool. Disperser looks like this. I never really used disperser at all. In this case, I used it and made a song. But then I started duplicating. So one thing that I do a lot is, once I get something that I like, I start duplicating that preset, and that's gonna be my starting point for the rest of the track. I'm probably not gonna start another sound from scratch. Like for me, it doesn't make sense, and you'll see why. Now we have this one. As you can see, same setup, disperser, OTT, saturator. Preset is pretty much the same thing, right? Alpha 1 for the oscillator A, oscillator B for the sub. Different sets, I mean, different things, variations. All pass here in this case, and even all pass here. So I was just changing a few things, but the foundation and the idea of this sound is pretty much the same thing, because I basically duplicated that sound and just added it here. But what I did here was this. So this is the interesting part. For some reason, I was just like messing around with the envelope too, and I always do this thing where you add envelope to the master tune, and if I just bypass these two, it basically creates this kind of like pitch going down, this kind of like hit at the beginning. But then I was like, what happens if I just add it here? And I started getting this kind of like wobbly sound, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna add it here. And of course, it didn't sound that good at first, but I was just messing around with the settings. I mean, you can go here and change the values and the limits of these parameters, but then it's and I was like, this is cool. I'm just gonna use it, and this is where it kind of like became a track. And that's kind of like the main idea. And then of course I need to just like make it full of things, turn this sound design session into a track. And how I do that? By just adding layers. So basically my starting point was something that sounded like this. We'll just go here. I mean, I'm just gonna keep using these, but I'm gonna turn off the effects. And this is what I was saying about the layers. I mean, it sounds okay, but it's not a track. There's nothing surrounding my main bass. There's not really any atmosphere, any ambience in the back. So it's just empty sound design. But the things like when I added all these layers, and maybe I'm pretty sure one of you guys have been at this point where the main bass is okay, and then you feel like it needs something else, and then you start like going insane with the post process here, instead of just adding layers or adding different stuff. So one thing that I learned is that stuff like this is pretty easy to mess. It's pretty easy to make it sound bad, you know. So it's better to just kind of like commit to the sound, leave it as it is, and just start surrounding the element with other layers, other stuff. So now it sounds like this. And of course I added some like elements here, downbeats. These are some samples, so there's nothing much to explain. I just grabbed some samples and used them here, low cut, that's pretty much it. And let me see what this is. Oh, I had that. It's pretty much like a variation on another layer, but I didn't use it at the end. This track delay, also important. In this case, it's not that much, but sometimes I use up to like, I don't know, 80, 60. I don't really care. I just change it and see if it makes sense. Let's turn it back to 0 and see what it sounds like. It's such a small adjustment, but it makes it moves the main bass a little bit to the right? So it has a little bit more swing. Some weird layers. I don't know. I was just like trying shit. That's pretty much it. That's kind of like the starting point for this tune. And some fills, auto fills. I like to just use my fills or do my fills with autofills because it's easy. Like I can just have this empty space here and just go add any autofills, some different samples, and then just play with these, you know. Like look at these, look at this sample, for example. I can just go and choose whatever section I want here, and it's so easy to just like change it, play it, and see if it makes sense. So that's what I have here. And then kind of like the B part. So since this arrangement is pretty repetitive, as you can see, this main bass is just playing all the time, like almost like 4 bars. I want to change it here. I don't want to keep playing this bass because it's gonna get super boring. So I changed it, and let me see what I did because I don't remember. So this is the main bass that we started with, right? And then I did this. Let's check it out because I don't remember. We have some wobbly sub, watery sub. We have one of these. Okay, so I grabbed this sample and kind of like worked it with O-pass to smear the signal, EQ because low end cut, we need that. Shifted to pitch it. Actually, that sounds good too. That sounds actually fire. OTT saturator just to kind of like make the sound a little bit more compressed, more distorted, a little bit balanced in the mix, I would say. Like this, and this transient layer, right? So it's a good combination of like little things that make a good sound, I guess. And what is this thing? Oh, and like a tonal thing on top, but it's pretty much the same idea, right? You get a loop, you loop it. I mean, you get a sound, you throw it into Soundboard, you loop it, process it a little bit, low cut, yeah? Sounds good, sounds clean, right? And of course, it would sound pretty empty without all these support layers, but you know, and I do think I have some other effects coming in this part. I have this. Oh no, this is not doing anything here. But yeah, pretty much same set of effects. And of course, make sure that if you're doing like some cuts, if you're removing the energy, make sure to make your cymbals kind of like follow and kind of like go with the same energy or patterns. Some R3 insane stuff. That's pretty much the same. Like that's pretty much the first drop. Some more audio fills, you know, but this is like super easy. It's like kind of like getting samples, putting them into the arrangement and see if they fit. There's nothing too interesting about that, I guess. And then go to the second part. Where's the main bass? Let me. Variation from the main sound. Nice. And then we have this one, which is creating a little bit like a pattern on top. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, wait, maybe we can see how this is done. Okay, that kind of like retrigger bass is just the escalate too. Like, I love this plugin. So basically retriggering here, and then you have different speeds. So yeah, that's what's making it kind of like go fast at that part. And then this is the first one that I showed before here, the one in the intro. So I have this, and then in this case I went for a B drop like right next to it. Sometimes I do, most of the time I would do build up and then go into something different. But I thought it was a good idea to just go into like a switch up like right away. I don't know why. And actually, this is something that I really like doing is I have this fake out here, but actually the drop already started at this point when it comes to like structures. As you can see, we have 16 and we have 16. It's not that the drop starts here and ends here. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the drop is already starting here because I like the structure when you do like a fake out. And I call it, I don't know, maybe it has a different name, but I call it 1-3. So basically it's like 1 for the transition or fake out, 3 for the main phrase and fill. 1-3, you know, and you can see it here, 1-3, and then at the end, like this part is kind of like a transition out of the drop. But if we consider this 1-3 transition, is, I mean, 1-3 phrase, it's an arrangement that I feel really comfy, really. It's an arrangement that I really like working in because it just flows well. I don't know. For me, it's easier to just make stuff. using something like this. So fill and then back to the 1/3. So transition. See, it's super simple, but it works really well. And this is what I posted on Instagram. So I resampled the whole thing. Or I think I resampled this group. So I resampled one of these. And it's pretty much the same setup that I used for that part. For this part here. So it's basically sub. It's just like a middle layer. Let's check it out. So we have the sub. And it's serum. Sine wave with another harmonic on top, and then white noise. And just a bunch of distortion. And then this layer. Oh, this is the one that I was using actually. But this is just the same sample over something like this. Serum effects, you smear the signal. Convolver for the pitch. I think this is giving me like a really good impulse. It's making it sound like a little bit cleaner actually. Space, EQ, distortion, pitch, you know, things that you apply in the process. But as you can see, my process is pretty much the same thing over and over. Like it would be some kind of like serum effects to reshape the sound a little bit. Convolver sometimes if I feel like I need some kind of tone in the sound. Space, compression, distortion, EQ. That's pretty much it. And then quarter note, just to kind of like keep the flow going. And I resampled this. I resampled that bass and used it here. As you can see. That's what I have. And I threw it into sampler. And I have this this shifter, this splitter. And I did it for the shifter thing, basically. So now I can kind of like pitch the top, the upper part of the frequency spectrum without changing the low end, right? Because what happens when you do something like this in the sound, you basically shift the whole frequency range, right? So you get that weird like sine wave or just harmonic going up. But I don't want that. So I just want to apply that to the highs. And what I did for this splitter was highs, lows, created 2 chains, and then we have imager. And the top one is, of course, selecting this part, and the bottom one is just selecting this part. So now I can just apply a shifter to this frequency range. And the sub is still clean. So serum effects, all pass. I'm spamming all pass all the time, honestly. Shout out all pass. And EQ, cut the low end, shifter to re-pitch it, compress, room for space, low cut again. That's pretty much it. And I distorted the low end a little bit. And then more like layers. Like check this shit out. Like I really like to just grab anything and just turn it into a layer. Like you don't need it. I guess one of the things that people get too confused about is what do I use for my layers? And honestly, as long as you know what needs to be doing, what you need to be doing with that layer is enough. Because I know that I want to fill the high end or just get some kind of crunch or something like this. So I know that I can distort, compress, do whatever, use any layer, and then cut the low end. Like that's all I need. And I don't know why I have to, but yeah. So this is just a respace actually. And like you never imagine to use something like this, I guess. But OTT, EQ, cut the low end. Now we have a higher layer. That sounds pretty gritty. Sounds good. And we have some other effects like some tonal hits with the snare. And these are samples, so it's not that I made them in the process. In this project. More layers. I'm still reusing that same sound. Still using it here. Just playing a different note. you know, go insane with your layers. Go insane with reusing sounds. That's the best thing they can do in order to just learn and get the most out of your sounds, in my opinion. And for example, all these like intense fills and transitions are just a bunch of sounds together. I mean, bunch of like auto. Like, what is that? And more here. I was just going insane. I was just trying to make it work, right? And more. Back to the same phrase, and then change here. Okay, we have this one. Let's check it out. Okay, and at this point, I pretty much reused this rack or this thing that I did with this sound, and I replaced it with a different sound. That's why this bass kind of sounds a little bit off. But at the same time, since I have the same processing that I applied to the other bass, it sounds a little bit similar. It sounds cohesive, right? So let me see what I'm using here. It's one of the free basses that I have on one of the bags. And I just grabbed that section. I think it sounded cool. And then more like noise, more layers, you know, classic. More effects going up. And of course, okay, this transition maybe sounds cool, or it's like, okay, what is this new instrument coming in? But at first, I didn't have this thing. This. Basically, I added this once I made it in the second drop, because like I usually just do this. You know, like a super basic transition into a breakdown. But one thing that I like doing is kind of like these, what's going to happen in the second part here. And basically, I had it empty, of course. And once I figured what I was doing in the second drop, I resampled the drop and added it here. But I don't think this part is super interesting, to be honest. It's just a respace with where is it? Some effects, a lot of effects. Of course, this is playing a bass line to make it a little bit more interesting. And this thing that I resampled from the second drop. But everything else is pretty much the same, just different changes. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to explain this. But effects going up, different set of effects. You can also try that. Like, you can literally copy the buildup they have here, put it here, but then change some effects, change maybe the drum patterns, some little things, and it will sound different. And that's more than enough. Move through the heat like a So I thought that was the main bass. Where is it? So I resampled this one, but the main bass is this one. Okay, let's take a look here. Let me see what's going on here. Same bass that I used before, resampled it, selected that part, and then I'm still using the splitter, so without any effects. Right, just that part coming from the main, from the sound I already resampled before. And then all pass. Fuck yeah. EQ, got the low end, compress room. Pretty much like cleaning stuff up. At this point, it's like I already have all the tools that I need, and I know I said it before, but this is what I'm trying. You know, I'm getting this, and this is basically a variation of one of the things that I used before, and pretty much like same with all these layers. And I think that's important. It's the best way to kind of like keep going and keep moving and keep having some sort of like creativeness in the writing process without having to take a lot of time in the sound design process, because that destroys your creativity when sound design is not working, you know? So I did this coming from the same sample that I resampled before, some effects, trying to make something cool, and I came up with this pattern. And then some transient layer, nothing too crazy. Some more layers, sorry. Fills, and then, yeah, I think I changed the snare here. Yeah, I'm missing that one. That's loud as hell. Same distortion. I don't think I needed to make these drums that loud, but the heat like a some background elements, you know, same stuff. Like different elements, of course. That's what makes it different. And then going to the second part. Variations from the same stuff that I had before, and then we go back to the same drop, like say final drop. And this is pretty much all the same, so not much sense about me explaining it, but yeah, hope I'm not forgetting anything important. Some vocal chops. Because this is a different pattern. It's not like a quarter note thing, so it would sound empty. It would sound a little bit empty in the at the off beats, right? So I added this vocal just playing. But these are all decisions that kind of like happen in the moment, right? For me, it doesn't really make sense to explain all the small detail, because sometimes it doesn't really make sense. Sometimes it's just, I don't know, I used a sample. I accidentally just placed it, I don't know, here instead of here, you know, and that made it sound good. And that's some of the stuff that I'm always looking for, actually. But yeah, I think that an important thing to keep in mind here is, or how I go about these tunes is, once I get the main sound going, I try to turn the sound sign session, which is just pretty much something like that, into something a little bit better, into a track or something that contains a little bit more information. How I do it with layers. I add a lot of background elements. And then fills, of course. Fills are super important, because if I had all these empty spaces, like, I don't know, here, that throws me off completely, right? So I want to get that done in the moment. So I can start working with something like this, maybe get some idea for the fills here, and then move to this part, change the fills, and of course, make sure that if the arrangement works, if the sounds work, if I'm just going to go into something different, you know, all decisions that kind of like take place in during the process of creating a track. I don't know. I think that's pretty much it. Intros and breakdowns are not super interesting in this tune. It was like a pretty straightforward tune. But yeah, of course, another important thing is that I'm not a magician when it comes to sound design. I just try stuff. I just make stuff that sounds ass for hours and hours until it works. And that's probably something that you don't see that much, because of course you're just listening to this or just like thinking that I got this main bass sounding perfect in just like 10 minutes, or that all these layers worked in no time. And that's not true. Actually, this tune, I finished this tune in like months ago. I'm not even sure like how long ago, but it took me time to just like finish all the little details and make sure that it works. I thought about changing the intro many times because it wasn't interesting enough. Even the breakdown, even the second drop, and all these things are actually take a lot of time. And then what you see is kind of like the end result. So that's also something very important. And if you still watching, I hope that that's useful, because sound design is such a I don't know. Could be so fun, could be so sick. It feels so good when you make something good, but could be super harmful if you don't know when to stop or when to like, I don't know, sometimes it's like you don't want to make music because you know you have to sound design, and that sucks. I've been there many times. So take the time to just have fun experimenting, experiment new things and new shit. Honestly, what made this tune kind of like happen was, and maybe it's such a small thing, but it's true, and it was just this thing, me just trying envelope 2 here, and it was kind of like me just messing around with sound. Like, I'd never do that. I would usually just, I was kind of like stuck here, and I was like, okay, what is this? Okay, this is sick. I want to finish it. You know, I want to work on this. And it's just, it maybe you're maybe like one step away from just turning a sound design session into a track. And you know that this happens a lot. It's like sometimes you're just working on a track and then something clicks and then boom, you finish the track in like a day. And this is what happened with this tune. So yeah, this track is out. Go stream it, go play it. If you have any questions about this thing, let me know. I'm super down to just make more tutorials, more videos, or even like shorts, YouTube shorts or reels for Instagram, just explaining more about this project. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that was good. And I'll see you next time.